The St. Augustine Menorcan litmus test. Did we bring Daddle Peppers from Menorca? Did we bring Daddle Peppers from New Smyrna? Did we find Daddle Peppers locked in the fort? None of this matters unless you are Menorcan. The St. Augustine Menorcan litmus test begins with the green and orange beauties that you grow in 5-gallon pickle buckets, unless your parents or in-laws give you a handful. Put gloves on your Mediterranean hands, for you are about to slice hellfire, cousin, from a 2-inch pepper guaranteed to burn you up alive with those innocent white seeds. Throw those seeds away and chop up that pepper. Sprinkle that flaming dice on some fine Perlo. And if you don't have Perlo, use beans and rice. And if you don't have beans and rice, are you Menorcan? But I digress. Now take a bite. Eat it all. Can you still talk? Do you want the garden hose? If you like what you ate, if you would eat more, we will then call you a good Menorcan.
Hi there, I'm Leslie with the St. Johns County Public Library System, and today I have the honor of speaking with Dr. Ann Browning Masters, who is a local author, an educator, a poet, and she is going to share some of that St. Augustine history with us. Hi there.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you. How about you?
Everything's good. We so appreciate you doing this with us today, and we are excited to hear a little bit about you and also this rich St. Augustine history.
Well, thank you. I'm a 12th generation Floridian. My family's first recorded being in St. Augustine was in 1602 with the marriage of Elena Gonzalez and Diego Alvarez. And that family went on for about 100 years ago, and a Sanchez gentleman married in. And it continued patrilineally to my mother, whose maiden name is Sanchez. So that's where my 12 generations come from in terms of Floridanos. But I'm also a Menorcan because of my ancestors who came here in 1777 and who walked from New Smyrna to St. Augustine from the indigo plantation. I think it's time for me to tell you a little bit about the name of the book and explain the terms a little bit better, if that's all right.
Oh, please. In fact, I do have a copy right here. I just wanted to show everyone, and that this is available at your local library.
Great, good. Well, I have written about a subgroup of St. Augustine folks that covers the time period from the Civil War through the Civil Rights period here. And it's combined with the Floridanos, the Menorcans, and what I have called the cattle whip crackers. The Floridanos are not very well known in St. Augustine. They are the descendants from the children of the first Spanish settlers in the first Spanish period here. And that's where Elena and Diego have me being Floridana. There's not a lot of stuff left about them in St. Augustine beside a few colonial buildings. I think there are 36 buildings that are left over from that Spanish period, that first Spanish period, and there are about 40 reconstructions of buildings from the Floridano time. But we do have the layout of the city, which was done at that time. That's a Floridano artifact also. And we have in a few other things, and I will show you a slide in a moment with some other artifacts that we have. So those are the Floridanos. In a moment, I'll show you a timeline to orient you as to when everyone arrived and left sometimes. The Menorcans were a mixture of Mediterranean people. Dr. Andrew Turnbull was populating his plantation, and so he went to the Mediterranean. He thought that the Greeks would be good workers because he thought their climate was similar to our wonderful, humid, hot climate. He did not have as much luck recruiting the Greeks, but he did get some, as well as some Italians, a few people from Majorca, and also some folks from France. But the majority of the people who were recruited were actually from the island of Menorca. And as Dr. Turnbull went around in the Med, he would make his loop, and then he would discharge everyone to the island of Menorca. And so we have this great population of men who are seeking a better life, and they are marrying the Menorcan women, which is why when they left, they were overpopulated on the boat because of all these marriages. And over time, what has happened is that the group has collectively become known as Menorcan because of so much intermarriage. And I can attest to that in that I have ancestors from the island of Menorca, from Greece, and from Italy, who were all in that colony, and they married each other over time. So those folks have been here a good long time too. The term cracker is really a freighted term because nowadays in popular parlance, we think of it as meaning someone who's a racist or a bigot. Some folks do. Other folks associate it with a culture that lives close to the land, who is very much into agriculture and cattle raising. And the usage in my writing, in my book, references their cattle whip cracking. They herded cows, and so they cracked their whips, and they were known as cattle whip crackers to me anyway. As a child, I was aware there were Georgia crackers and there were Florida crackers. And it just meant which side of the state line your ranch or your homestead was laid out on. So in my writing, that's the reference that I use, is for people who were ranchers, basically, or who, as we say in the South, they run cows. You know, how many head of cows you have. Now we have a slide that shows us a timeline of when folks arrived and when some of them left. If you look at the far left, you see the first Spanish period from 1565 to 1763. And this is where the Floridanos were born here. They were reported to Spain in the census and other goings on as Floridanos. And these folks kind of rocked along for a couple of hundred years until the British period, when this is when Dr. Turnbull received a land grant for his plantation. What happened was most of the Floridanos left. The Menorcans eventually, during this period, arrived in St. Augustine after 9 years of harsh treatment and starvation and death. Remember, they had a population of 1,400 when they arrived, and only 700 were alive 9 years later to walk to St. Augustine. This short period was followed by another Spanish period from 1784 to 1821. And some of the Floridanos returned and the Menorcans remained. Now, they did not all speak the same Spanish dialect, but they were of the same faith, so intermarriages began and they got along quite well. And then here we have in 1821, we became a territory. And this is where I say the cattle whip crackers came in from Georgia and North Carolina. But in actuality, we had illegal immigrants during that second Spanish period of these crackers who came to Florida. But all they had to do was swear allegiance to the king and convert to Catholicism, and they too could be Spanish citizens or residents and receive a land grant. So that worked out for them. Ultimately, we went into statehood, and then we have this little group of folks over time who are intermarrying with each other. Now, one thing I like to do is make sure we're all on the same island, because when you hear the word Menorca, I have had the experience of some folks thinking we're in Mallorca. But if you look to the right of the peninsular Spain, you see the Balearic Islands, and you see the top island is Menorca. People often ask me, why do you see one written M-E-N and why do you see one written M-I-N? Well, this is a British map for one thing. If it's in English, it's M-I-N. But trust me, I've been to Menorca 4 times, and when you go there, it is M-E-N, Menor, the minor island. So just so we're all on the same either peninsula or island. Okay. In our city, we have signage that also tells about these two groups. This Los Floridanos sign is found at the Visitors Information Center, and the Menorcan Heritage sign, it has been moved from this location. It is in the Menorcan Pocket Park that is behind the Columbia restaurant. So it's still there, it's just been moved. And I think, when I spoke of we don't have a lot of artifacts from the Floridanos. It was so long ago, things crumble. The British, for some reason, tore down some of the Spanish colonial buildings and redid them. But here is a restoration of Jose Sanchez de Ortigosa and Juana Perez's home, which these are my many, many, many times great-grandparents. Interestingly, Juana's descendants, who became the Espinosas, their homes were on the bayfront, but they were not restored for some reason or other. And then another slide shows us the intermarriage that begins. This is a home built by Juan Moneda on Treasury Street here. Juan was a Menorcan. He sold it to a Floridano, Juan Gonzalez Montes de Oca, who then sold it to Nicholas Sanchez, who married Maria Magdalena Juaneda, Juan's daughter. These are also great-grandparents of mine, Nicholas and Maria. So you can see we have a Floridano marrying a Menorcan lady. So we had quite a lot of that went on in St. Augustine. Another artifact of the very few that we have, I like to think are the language artifacts. For example, I was taught to say Antonia for the auntie who was named Antonia in English, with the N, with the tilde to make it Anye. The Sanchez of my grandfather's name was accented on the first syllable. And you see R-O-G-E-R-O. Now, many people in St. Augustine know that that's a Menorcan name, but it has a Spanish, not the Catalan, it has the Castilian Spanish pronunciation here, which is interesting. So you see it's pronounced Rojero. And I arrived in college thinking the whole world would look at this word and say Rojero, not realizing most English-speaking people in the United States would say Rogero. So that's an artifact that we have. It's interesting that a Menorcan name was translated into Castilian Spanish. If you visit Menorca, it's Rojer. You know, it's different there too. And lastly, you see Rafael. Well, a great uncle of mine, I thought, was named Rafael. And I wondered about that. I thought, what a strange name. Why would anyone name their child Rafael? On his tombstone, we see Rafael Sanchez. Okay, so that's a little bit of Anglicization there. Some people took hanging on to their language very seriously. Francesca Sanchez de Miot, or Panchita, that was her nickname, was so serious about this that we see in her 1931 tombstone, it is written, Panchita Sanchez de Miot, she tacked on her husband's name, nació born in 1842, murió in 1931. So less than 100 years ago, my Sanchez ancestors were still using the Spanish language a little bit. I remember none of them, other than correcting pronunciation and accents, no Spanish words, but it was still with us. So that's pretty much what we have are the buildings, the layout of the town, and a few language artifacts from those Floridanos. Now, moving on to the Menorcans, you can see it's about 15 by 45 miles wide. A nice little island. You can do it in a day, but I say take a week if you go. Great, wonderful bay that they have there. This was why Menorca was taken over by everyone from the Phoenicians to you name it, Phoenicians on. It's a great harbor for wintering over, for hiding from pirates. The American and the British armies both trained here, and the British were there so much and so often, either training or actually having the holding of the island, that there is a British cemetery, a British naval cemetery, and there's a historic group that is restoring the building for their hospital. So if you go, you might want to check that out. Now, people who live in St. Augustine are familiar with downtown in front of the cathedral, Father Camp's statue. This is Father Camp's monastery in Menorca. If you go inside, you will see about a 2/3 replica of the statue that we have in the courtyard in the cathedral in St. Augustine of Father Camp's with the names of the families who came. We also have Menorcan street signs, Genopoli, that's a Greek, Genevar, Greek. Masters, I have no idea of the origin. This was de maestre, anglicized at various times by the various lines. Some did it immediately upon territory days, others did it later. A document talking about the first Congress for Florida becoming a state has about 4 different spellings for masters, some the old spelling, some a transitional, and some in English. Propal, Spanish, Pomar, Propal, Menorcan, Pomar, Menorcan. Another artifact that's recent, and I say it's only because it's since the 1850s, is the Hurricane Lady. The Hurricane Lady was kept in a home on St. George Street, and obviously one would understand that when hurricanes or storms were coming, that people would go and venerate her and ask for protection. She was brought to St. Augustine in the 1850s on a Spanish ship, the ship encountered a terrible storm or hurricane, so they venerated the Madonna and said, if you will please get us to St. Augustine, we will make sure your statue is venerated. Well, they did. And the first family who kept her was the Rodriguez family, but then she was eventually turned over to the Benet family for about 100 years. And if you're familiar with St. George Street, you know the Benet store, and this is the family we're speaking of, which also poets and writers come from them too. She is now with the Sisters of St. Joseph in their museum on Alvarez Street. So she's still with us, but she is a Menorcan, very much a Menorcan Madonna. And then we have this lovely blend of food, which is the great cultural thing, right? Fromageades. When you hear fromage, most people go, cheese, right? Fromageades are a cheese pastry that is made at Easter time. And it's a very, little round thing of pastry with some cheese and maybe a drop or two of hot sauce. And you fold it over and crimp it. And on the top, you make a cross, and the cheese kind of comes out while it cooks. I'm here to tell you, as they say in the South, that in St. Augustine, we probably have the closest thing to the original fromageades, because in visiting Menorca, when we asked for fromageades, remember I said the British were there quite a lot? Well, what that has happened to them as a culture is this little cultural shift in cooking. And you can have meat fromageadas, seafood fromageadas, fruit fromageadas. You will not have fromageadas with cheese. Theirs resemble the British meat pasties or meat pies. So we still make them in St. Augustine. Rat cheese is, I have no idea where the term came from, refers to a hoop of cheddar cheese. Think of, what you would see on a chop block back in an old country store. Mullet are Florida fish. Those are Menorcans. We eat them by I would say barrel, but no, we're beyond that. Gopher, I have to explain because everyone's not from St. Augustine and they don't understand that I'm referring to a land tortoise. The reactions I have gotten have included, oh, those poor people, they must have been terribly poor. They were eating rodents, but no, we weren't that poor. But we love the gopher stew so much and we ate them so often that they are no longer legal to eat in Florida and much of the Southeast. Daddle peppers, another St. Augustine pepper. There are many myths about daddle peppers. And if you go to Menorca and ask for a daddle pepper, they will ask you, why are you asking for a date pepper? That's what daddle means there. There are no daddle peppers in Menorca. Actually, they have been traced to migrating up from South America. But you will still see today in some of the products sold that people are saying that they came with Menorcans. No, Menorcans probably found them here because of their migration. And then we have Perlau. And you look at that and you go Pilau. I do not see an R. It's a mystery R. I have looked at cookbooks from Charleston through New Orleans and Savannah, and you will see Perlau, you will see pilaf, paella. Rarely will you see Perlau spelled like this, which is a Menorcan spelling apparently, or a Menorcan hand-me-down, most likely. And it's basically a poor man's paella with one protein source, whether it's chicken or beef or ham, shrimp, that kind of thing. During the Depression, my grandmother put butter beans to make the protein. So we have Perlau a lot, but we don't do it all the time anymore. It's very labor intensive to cook everything down. So we really love you if we bring you Perlau. For us, it is comfort food, it is new baby food, it is funeral food, and definitely at the holidays, there is a pot of Perlau on the table. Now this leads us to the all carbohydrate meal. And this is not unique to St. Augustine. It is unique to working folks, which is what many Menorcans and crackers here were. And here's a sample. We would have macaroni and cheese, potato salad, some lovely biscuits, and cornbread. And for the dessert, we would have pound cake. And as my Menorcan grandmother would say, for our vegetable, because she enunciated every syllable, we would have a lovely sliced tomato. So that was, we don't so much eat like that anymore. We'd all be dead because we're not all doing that hard, intensive labor. So those are some things that kind of shared and go across cultures. And then becoming American. Some changes, the Espinosa family, some called themselves Spinata, or probably Spinata, and Spinholster. My married name, Masters, came from Maestre or de Maestre. The Menorcan name, Triai, some people changed it to Teal. And the last one, Juanita, remember Maria Magdalena, Juanita? This beats me. I do not know how Juanita translated to Floyd, but there it is. And so we have many, many, many people here who are Floyds who are actually Menorcans from the beginning with the Floridanos. For those who are interested in genealogical societies, there is a Menorcan Cultural Society and a Los Floridanos Society. So that would be available if anyone wants to look those up. And that takes us to the overview of these three cultures who all ended up marrying each other in St. Augustine.
And I thank you so much for sharing the history of St. Augustine with us and the different peoples that make up our community and your book. Would you mind sharing a few poems with us?
Oh, I'd be glad to. Thank you. I have a couple of poems I'd like to share from the Floridanos. One is from and about Lola Sanchez. You may remember the tombstone of Panchita that I showed you. Panchita was her older sister, and she had a younger sister, Eugenia, or in the South, Eugenia is what we would say. And they were Confederate spies. And Lola lived an interesting life, she and her sisters, because it encompassed Spanish St. Augustine, territorial times, the Civil War, and statehood. So she had a great perspective of how things can change in a piece of land. Not like she thought it would change, I'm sure, but I like to tell you her story. Lola and her sisters did what people do when there's a war. In this case, it meant that the soldiers, these officers would be at their home and they would cook for them because they had to cook for the Union soldiers. St. Augustine and that territory was held by the Union. And so one evening they heard plans for a big event. And as they're in their cooking and they're listening to what's going on, Lola leaves her sisters and gets on her horse, and she rides to the St. John's River, where a sentryman, a Confederate sentryman, gives her a boat, and she rows across the St. John's River. And then she passes this information along that she heard. Then she rows back across the St. John's River, gets on her horse, and comes back to St. Augustine, and comes back into the kitchen, which was separate from the rest of the house in those days, so the wood stove would not burn down the house. And of course, what happens the next day is that the Union route was not a route at all, and the Confederates named a boat after them, the three sisters. Now, the deal is, though, had Lola truly ridden to the river, rode across the river and back, she may not have been back for breakfast, let alone dinner. So after talking with some of my Floridano cousins, we've decided that they did live near the river. She probably got there on a horse, but there are little islets in the river, and she probably went to a camp that was there, and that's probably what happened. But I like to share her perspective on the whole thing of her time. There are a couple of Castilian Spanish words, abuelo, grandfather, just so you know. The phrase, hablamos español, we speak Spanish. I referenced Johnny soldiers, those are Confederate soldiers. And I think that's the most that you need to know. So obviously, this is called Lola Sanchez. Yes, I did leave Eugenia and Panchita in the kitchen to bluff hungry Union boys, and I rode like a woman fool to the river, to the Johnny soldiers who launched my boat and all their stories. This was all we knew. Spy parley, flight. Young women don't picture being hanged. When their boys rename a beaten down Yankee bark Three Sisters, they smile, they curtsy, they think they ride a history, but it does not step where they thought. History could join up again, like creek branches, Papa said. The old Floridano, after all, had married my Menorcana mama. Then they watched a herd of wars dance like wild-eyed horses across the peninsula. They knew being any rebel could be temporary. Another battle, he said, another treaty. Hablamos español. They were not here, merciful God, to mourn the next war with Spain. History wrote its own book without our name. Sweet mother, who remembers when this new world began to sliver change among us? I have children and children's children, and now they are called crackers for whips for American cattle, as if Spanish cows never left the boats. Listen, child, hold this tight. Grandpapa's abuelo fetched our first herd, taught us how to work them, passed down his heart. This is how we bore all the Floridas, bred and raised all the bloodlines. These Floridanos, these Menorcans, these cattle whip crackers. And that was Lola's perspective. That was her life lived of these three groups in this time in Florida. Now, as you can imagine, this family was, the Sanchez family was a Roman Catholic family, and they were pretty serious about it. So when my grandfather, Charlie Sanchez, married Annie Laurie Ivy from Georgia, who was not a Catholic, Annie Laurie had a lot of grief from the in-laws. As it is said, hard shell Baptist Annie Laurie Ivy went up in there amongst those cradle Catholics at Holy Branch and married Charlie Sanchez. She was outnumbered and outflanked from day one. So I like to think that I can write revisionist poetry as well as anybody else. I mean, gee, we've seen it on TV, right? So I imagine that truly those Sanchez ghosts are really sorry about the hard time they gave Annie Laurie. And I have written the Sanchez ghosts lament for Annie Laurie. I will not sing it or you would lament, but I will read it to you. Forgive our ways, dear Annie Laurie. We truly thought that we were right. This was our home 100 years. We had our pride. We had our might. Forgive our ways, dear Annie Laurie, for they were harsh and clannish ways. Aught should live as then you did in your new and married days. Forgive our ways, dear Annie Laurie, so fair and brave. Unlike our own, we did not know to give much care to one so far away from home. Forgive our ways, dear Annie Laurie, blue-eyed bride whom we gave pain. If only we could bid you love, or time could bring you here again. If only we could bid you love, or time could bring you here again. So be nice to the in-laws and everybody else is what I would say is that Floridano message.
Well, Dr. Masters, I have just enjoyed this program so much. I loved your poetry. I loved hearing about the history of St. Augustine. And if we wanted to get in touch with you, is there a website that we could go to?
Yes, it's annebrowningmasters.com. And there's a way to email me through that and a phone number there also. Great.
Well, thank you. We also have some other wonderful books all about the people that Dr. Masters spoke of. So please visit your public library. We would love for you to check these out.